Emotional algebra, where the heart meets the math. What is integral is derivative as you figure out your path. Power plus emotions equals more than you can see. Listening to the wisdom of our
Welcome
host,
to
Dr.
Emotional Algebra with Dr. E. We're here to help you understand the relationship between the variables we use in our daily lives that contribute to our interactions with others, all with the goal of becoming better human beings. I'm your co-host, Andrew Tavani.
And I'm Dr. E.
That's right, Dr. E. Dr. Eric Fisher, for everyone to know your full name, but your patients all call you Dr. E. And Dr. E, in the last episode, you introduced some new concepts. We were talking about the dichotomies in hierarchies. So quickly, let's review what we did there, what we went over there. And then I know we've got some other stuff coming up with the roles we play in life.
Last episode, we talked about the four dichotomies: good and bad, right and wrong, strong and weak, and win and lose. And these are the four primary dichotomies that underlie the hierarchical world that we live in. And understanding those is really critical to understanding communication and understanding ourselves and the challenges that we face when we set them up in a hierarchical manner. What we're going to talk about today are the roles that people play. And these roles were first talked about back in the 1960s, 70s, a part of transactional analysis and some of the books that were coming out then that looked at these classic roles. And I've also added a bit to them. And I really see how they do play out in the world we live in. And our world is actually dependent in some ways. This hierarchical model is almost dependent on these roles. So with that, let's go ahead and dive on in.
All right, let's do it, Dr. E.
Right. So given that these roles that are played in a hierarchical world, first we have to set up those circles. And we'll help to tease in or weave in how these dichotomies play into these different roles that are played. So the first role is the victim. And what I always ask people when I give this presentation is, which circle do you think that victim would be? Which role would that victim play? So I'm going to ask you, Andrew, which role do you think that victim would command? Which circle?
Well, Dr. E, I would think that the victim would most likely be the yellow ball on this visualization. And the yellow is also the smallest. Mm-hmm. So for those who are listening, we have 5 balls or spheres here. From the left, a big blue one that goes all the way down to the right. The 5th one is a small yellow ball. So I would say that's the victim.
Okay. And do you think that there are any benefits or pros to playing that victim in our culture?
I think that there probably are some benefits. Obviously, we've talked about some power structures and power dynamics. I would think that you don't have much power, but maybe you're getting things for free, perhaps, okay. Or even just emotionally within a relationship. If you're the victim, you have a certain position in relation to somebody else that maybe that some of the other balls on this hierarchy don't have.
Right. So if I'm the victim, basically, I didn't do anything wrong. It was done to me. So that's the key tenet of being able to play the victim, is something was done to me and I didn't do it. So if something happened to me and I didn't do it, then there's no fault, no blame, no shame, no failure, no guilt, no responsibility. I'm off the hook. If we look around the world we live in, I say we live in a victim culture, because so many times we want to absolve ourselves of any guilt and responsibility. If we look at our legal system, it basically is a dichotomous structure of guilt or innocence. Not, well, this person played this role and this person played this role. And I think we see some pretty powerful court cases going on these days that we've set it up this way. And yeah, I think some legal cases you can say are, well, there is shared responsibility here, but in a hierarchical world and in that role of the victim, it's not set up that way. It's typically all or nothing. So the next role is the persecutor. The persecutor is the person that causes the victim pain. So you can see I'm asking, when I'm explaining this is the same way I do it in my office. I ask people questions, and there's a reason why. So Andrew, which circle would you say would be the persecutor?
Well, Dr. E, that's a good question. I think the obvious answer would be the big blue ball on the left side, But I also think it could be anyone who is in a higher position of power than the victim.
Now,
What do you
you
think?
as listeners and viewers, I also want you to be doing this exercise yourself. So work along with us on this and just kind of have these ideas in your head. The reason I ask these questions is it's kind of my way also to have a projective test, or like an ink blot or Rorschach test, is it's letting me know how you see the world. When people see the big circle and they say, well, the big circle is the persecutor, almost always, and I can say with about 99% probably certainty, those people who see the big circles of persecutor don't often trust authority. Either historically they've had situations, societally they see things through vicarious learning, and or even maybe part of their innate approach to the world. They tend to see the big circles or people with ultimate powers being those who can cause them the most pain. And when the big circle is your persecutor, you can't trust easily, and or you don't trust easily. So in this model, anybody above the persecutor can be, or anybody above, the victim in power and status can be the persecutor. Okay. Now you might be noticing, if you're viewing this, I haven't labeled the top circle yet. The next role is the rescuer. So by default, the rescuer is often seen as the big circle because they have to have the power to crush the persecutor and rescue the victim. So that's a really key point of this whole situation, is who has the power to rescue the victim from their circumstance or from the person that's causing them pain. Now, in this progression of different circles or spheres that can play these different roles, I then lay out that you can have a victim in the second to smallest circle, the third to smallest circle, the fourth to smallest circle. You can have the persecutor as the third biggest or third smallest, fourth smallest. We're all the way up to the top. The biggest circle can also be the persecutor, as I said. The issue to see and look at here is that when you have a victim, you at least need a persecutor. If there's only a victim and a persecutor, there is no rescuer. That often leads to a struggle, and often leads to where the victim feels they stand in who's going to help me, who's going to rescue me. So in this situation, we often then also have the people that start it. So who's the person that starts the conflict? Well, ask yourself the question first. So again, Andrew, who do you think starts a conflict? Who's the instigator?
Wow. I mean, Dr. E, I could see several different scenarios here. One, I think a victim could be an instigator, perhaps, and maybe and often is an instigator. And if you're talking about being in a victim culture, it might be in a victim's interest to instigate because they know something bad will be done to them, and then they'll receive some benefit of a punishment to their persecutor. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. You're right on. And that happens often. That's actually one of the issues. If we look at kind of this Trump trial situation with Stormy Daniels, that is a situation where you're looking at people want to see it as a victim instigator, somebody who's played this role that they were preyed upon. And then also in the same breath, Donald Trump's being painted as a victim in this of her, because if a victim's instigating, then they're not really a victim. They're just playing that role and they're trying to manipulate the system. And that's what often happens in the court of life and the court of law and the court of our families or our communities, is we don't really know who to trust. So who's the victim? Who's the persecutor? Who's the rescuer? There are a lot of illusions and a lot of perceptions. Again, you bring up a lot about perception, and you're right on, Andrew, and we do that because the way we see our life is about perception. Reality is usually between the two people and what they're both seeing. It's not in either one or the other person.
So Dr. E, that reminds me of an old saying. I think there's three sides to every story: yours, mine, and the truth. Right?
Exactly. And that's kind of what we're looking at here. So if we progress along this, anybody can be the instigator. You have victims that instigate really to see who's going to rescue them. Is somebody going to rescue me? Will somebody take care of me and fix this and make it better? Then you have the person, and also there's going to be another thing we'll get into in a little bit too, when we get a little bit deeper into other roles that are played. But you also have the persecutor who's going to rescue to see who can I push around, who can I bully, who can I have feel submissive to me. Then you have the rescuer that instigates, because that's often, the fireman who lights the fire so he can put it out and come to the rescue, and people are supposed to give him all this adulation. So we're doing it for different reasons. So now let's go back to the idea from here and look at the dichotomies and how they play into this. For a victim to be rescuable, okay, this is how they have to look in order to get what they want and play in that role. The victim has to be rescuable. So remember, they didn't do anything wrong. So they have to be seen as good and right, but weak, okay? The persecutor doesn't care necessarily about good and right as long as there is no rescuer. They want to be seen as strong so that they can have power over their victim, and then they'll define the good and the rights of that relationship. Okay, we see that a lot in abusive relationships. We see that even in some ways in the idea of what's happening in our political discourse. I know I keep coming back to it a lot, but that's where I really see a lot of the exemplary behavior that's letting us see the problems that are going on, not only in our culture, but in the world at large. And then you have the rescuer. In order to be seen as a rescuer, they have to be seen as good and strong and right. Whether it's a parent, or whether it's a teacher or a doctor or a pastor or a president or politician, in order to be able to be seen as somebody who has got the right motives, they are going to always present the side that makes them look right and strong and good. And if they did something wrong, it's often because of somebody else, or they didn't do it, or they're just being smeared. So people don't take responsibility in that role. And overall, this is a whole model where nobody takes responsibility. What happens when a rescuer comes along as the persecutor has been bullying the victim in essence? Well, then they didn't do it. They find a justification or reason why. So now what we're doing is we're moving now to what happens when somebody feels victimized. All right. Now, why I say this is because to me, everybody in this model has played the victim at some point or another. So when you feel like a victim, you pretty much have a couple choices if you don't have a rescuer, okay? So remember, if I'm rescued, then you're going to take care of me. You're going to make everything better. If you're going to make everything better, that's great. But what happens when the rescuer makes a demand of the victim and needs some help, needs some support, expects the victim to do their part, or the victim feels set up for conditional love, or feels abandoned, feels shamed, guilted, emotions like that come up. When the victim feels set up by their rescuer, conditionally loved, abandoned, excess demands or more demands than they want to follow through or put upon them, who does that, or what does that victim turn the rescuer into?
Well, Dr. E, this has become quite the pop quiz today here. I would say I'm going to, I don't know the answer to these questions, but I'm going to go with the persecutor.
Exactly. That victim turns their rescuer into persecutor. So then they often have to look for another rescuer. So what you find and how we get to the behavioral choices for the victim is often victims have gone from rescuer to rescuer to rescuer to the point to where they often feel like it's just a matter of time till this rescuer is going to become my persecutor. So I've got a couple choices. Those choices are, when they don't see the world as having any rescuers, are either to play the justified persecutor or the learned helplessness role. All right. What I mean by learned helplessness is that there are situations where people feel so overwhelmed by life that they just give up. The research they did in the 60s with dogs is they put dogs in a cage and then they electrified the bottom of the cage, but would have a button that when you press that button, it would complete the circuit and the cage would be electrified. And the dogs would jump and yelp and try to get out. And they do it again, jump and yelp and try to get out, jump and yelp and try to get out, until ultimately those dogs would lay down and take the shock. Then they'd open the cage door and they'd shock the cage again. So Andrew, what do you think the dogs did when they shocked the bottom of the cage again, when they pressed that button?
I would guess that they didn't leave even though the cage door was open, because they learned to just cry and scream or whatever.
Right. They just gave up. They don't even cry and scream anymore. They just give up and take the shock. And it's the devil, is kind of the way I see it. And that's how a lot of people feel. We talk about a lot of people who just give up and they want to be taken care of, or, they just don't participate. Well, often it's because they live a life of perceived learned helplessness. Everybody has more power than me. It's just a matter of power. So I'm going to be a matter of time. So I'm going to be manipulated, betrayed, abused, violated, blamed, shamed, guilted. So I just give up. And that's where, again, where we have to see that these roles and that hierarchical way we look at the world and the way we have power over is disincentivizing our kids, our young adults, our adults, and we say people are just living off everybody else. Well, there's in part a reason to do that. So we got to see what happens when we continue to enculturate these models and we continue to perpetuate this model that really feeds on itself and feeds on each other. We're going to continue to have the same problems. So this is another reason to promote cultural change.
Yeah, Dr. A, so we're talking about learned helplessness. I thought there was an interesting phrase that you used earlier too, which was playing the victim. Does it become a phenomenon where victims just get set in a victim mentality and don't want to get out of it, maybe subconsciously or consciously, because life is just easier as a victim?
Absolutely. Now, there is a difference between playing the victim and feeling the victim and feeling victimized. Just because someone feels victimized doesn't mean that they are a victim. They might say, hey, somebody's trying to mess with my power. I'm going to do something about it in part. I'm going to be proactive, or I realize why they're doing that. They're trying to mess with my power. I don't have to let people mess with my power. Remember, in that equity-based world, no one can take your power. We give it away, and we don't realize the ways we give it away. Over time, we've just been taught that people can take it, and we start to believe it after time and time and time again is presented. So now we get to that role of the justified persecutor. The justified persecutor feels victimized first, but guess what? They're not going to take the abuse anymore. They've had enough. They realize that being good and right and looking good and right hasn't gotten them the help that they needed because there are no rescuers. So now they're like, you started it, I'm going to finish it. And we see that often with kids in their families, and then it changes from there. And we see it throughout our culture, again, in many pockets of our culture. All we have to do is just often look in our backyard, look in our neighborhoods, look at the world at large, and we'll see it again and again and again. We even see it in situations that justify wars. So again, this is a pandemic of the way that we view things and how it comes across. In that justified persecutor role, that's why I say that if a rescuer comes along, then the justified persecutor can say, they started it, I'm going to finish it. I wouldn't have had to do this if they didn't do this to me. And then the rescuer is put in a situation of adjudication. How do I figure out who is right and who is wrong? And in that, again, we're back to that dichotomy again, versus looking at understanding the bigger picture, looking at everybody being self-responsible and honest with themselves. This is often about painting illusions for the rest of the world to see, so that I can play the role I want to play. And that's the key, is it's not about truths. It's about manipulation, creating perception. And often the perceptions start from within me, and I just project those to the outside world.
Now, when people do this, are they doing it consciously? Or are they doing it subconsciously, or combination of both in some cases?
I think it's many times both. And I think sometimes, often, it might even be more unconsciously than consciously, because they're so used to playing those roles, they just don't see it. And again, in one of our future episodes, I'm teasing that and how that happens, in our attitude and belief systems. We got to understand where they come from. So again, what we're talking about are the variables that go into that emotional algebra that we're building on. So we have the dichotomies. We have the ways that we get power through undermining, usurping. We have the views that we have of the different roles that we're playing and how we switch into those roles and when we switch into those roles. So now from here, the next question asked is, when is a rescuer a victim? What I mean by this is you can have a rescuer that feels victimized by their victims. Okay, and that seems a little bit complex there. But the idea is the rescuer often will say, I've done this and this and this for you, and what have you done for me? And that's when the rescuer becomes a martyr. What I see with that is that's then where there's a condition placed on love. And when you place a condition on love, you're going to affect trust. Because now, as the victim who wants to be rescued, now you're just seen as a pawn, as a commodity. And even the rescuer can feel like a commodity. So even when I'm working with my daughter, and there's times that we feel, we've done these things for her and she hasn't returned the favors, I talk to her about relationships. I talk to her about the transactional nature of relationships. I say, we as a family are a team. And for a team to succeed, we all have to do our part and work together. And you're a critical part of that team. And I know she's going to respond perfectly and go, oh, yes, Dad, you're exactly right. Let me change that now from now until the end of time. No, that's not how it happens, because she still has her motives, her behaviors, her wants, her wishes on how she's going to try to respond in the world. So it's about then being patient and continuing to do that. And even if there's a time that I and or my wife, God forbid, we play that martyr, we'll come back and own it. Say, that might have been a little unfair how we came apart or came across. Wow, we want you to still continue to understand this nature of a relationship, because our job as a parent is to prepare you for the rest of your life, not the rest of ours. We want you to see that if you are going to want to have relationships that are healthy and balanced, you have your part in that relationship. And they have their part in the relationship. So don't play the victim and find people are going to rescue you. And don't play the rescuer and then think that they owe you something. Because that, again, too often happens in this whole model. And that results in these breakdowns in these relationships.
And you're using that phrase again, this time with the martyr. You said playing the martyr. Is it bad to be a martyr? I think like a lot of people's perception of martyrdom, right, may come from religion, in which case it was somewhat good to be a martyr. Martyrs were portrayed as righteous, let's say. Is it good in life, in relationships, to be a martyr, or it sounds like it may not be?
Well, it's a great point. Again, what do we want to do as a rescuer? We want to aggrandize ourselves. We want to make ourselves look and feel integral to the process and to who we are and to our role in the lives of other people. And we're going to talk a little about that in the next piece. So it's a great question. But yes, we often admire martyrs, those who have given their life for others. But the idea is when we do it in that hierarchical way, then we're wanting something from that. We're expecting something in return. And that's what we have to realize is how that happens. Because if you look at people who we call martyrs, gave of themselves selflessly. They never walked around saying, I am a martyr. Often they were called the martyr after their death, after they were no longer in this world. So if we want recognition in this world now, we have to look at why are we going about it this way? Why did we not internalize the good feeling that we have, that intrinsic motivation to be the best parent we can be, to teach our child values, balance, relationships, respect, self-respect, not the fear-based respect, but the self-oriented respect of treat others how you want to be treated. These are things we want to look at, because often we feel like, well, if it was good enough for me, it's good enough for them. And that, to me, that's a cop-out. That is learned helplessness at its best, because somebody doesn't want to reach farther. Now, am I saying that person is bad? No. I'm challenging you to look inside yourself and ask yourself, why am I doing this? Why am I making these comments? Am I looking for an easy out so that I can justify my behaviors? If always we ever do that, then we're going to teach our children to justify, to manipulate, to hide behind their status, to feel like the imposter inside while they present something else to the outside. So it's an absolutely great question in that situation, how we look at that. So the next concept we're looking at here in this model is the idea of the games of the chronic players. What do I mean by chronic players? I say that we have chronic victims, chronic persecutors, and chronic rescuers. And people play those games almost habitually through life. It becomes the ways they approach their life and their relationships. The game they play is the how much do you blank me game. And the goal is to fill in that blank. So when we're looking at that, we have to ask, okay, the victim plays their how much do you blank me game. What is that blank? The chronic persecutor plays their how much you blame me game. So the chronic victim plays the how much do you love me game. They often say, if you really love me, you do this or this or this for me. Or if you don't do this, then I'm going to kill myself. Or if you don't do this for me, then you just don't care about me at all. So we have to realize how these games are really about manipulations that they might not even realize they're manipulating, but their love and sense of worth and value is often found through what can I get from outside of me in the way that people take care of me. The chronic persecutor, I call them a bully. They play the how much do you fear me game. They're looking for people to feel afraid of them. They play that intimidation game. Now, again, what we want to remember is every persecutor, every rescuer has all felt like a victim at some point or another. All right. So when we understand why they're doing that and what dichotomies they're trying to avoid and or project, then we can start to understand, oh, that's why that person is. So nobody really believes in themselves, even in these roles that are played. So now we get to that chronic rescuer. What do chronic rescuers want? Well, often I say chronic rescuers have God complexes. And what we have to look at is, well, what do we reserve for God? What do we call what we do at church on Sundays, but worship? Now, if we say that people want to be worshiped, so often when I'm pointing this out, I'm explaining it to parents or adults or even kids, people say, well, being worshiped, that's bad and wrong because that's reserved for God. But people do it all the time. They play the how much do you worship me game. And then you're supposed to submit to me. You're supposed to give me what I want. You're supposed to tell me how great I am. Again, just look at around at the world we live in and look at how people create that, no matter whatever role they might be, parent, teacher, again, politicians, doctors, all these roles that people often rise to status that they find themselves in those roles of status because they've migrated to places where they try to get what they want. And again, if I'm the rescuer, I'm seen as good and strong and right. So I'm not going to acknowledge what I've done wrong or bad. So what we have now, the next piece to look at here is, where does everybody get their power from? The victim gets their power from the rescuer. The persecutor gets their power from crushing the victim. The rescuer gets their power from crushing the persecutor and rescuing the victim. So all of these roles are codependent. If you don't think we've all played these roles, I want you to ask yourself, again, are you really being honest with yourself? This is about self-exploration. It's not about telling everybody else your answers. It's about really being honest with yourself and telling yourself your own answers to really look at these things. Because if you're not going to see these things, the prospect of change is going to be pretty difficult and pretty challenging. So now, going back to the model, who's got the most power? So in this model, Andrew, who's got the most power? The victim, the persecutor, the rescuer?
Wow, another tough pop quiz question here, Dr. E. I am going to say the chronic persecutor, but I don't know the answer.
Okay, all right. Well, the way I see it is that it's really the victim. The victim has the most power because they decide who they see as their persecutor. They decide who they see as their rescuer. They decide when they turn their persecutor into the rescuer or the rescuer into the persecutor. And most powerfully, they decide when they choose to step out of that role of victim and recognize, maybe I feel victimized. Well, I have the power of self-perception. I have the power to perceive my environment in the way that I want to perceive it. And I can perceive it in a healthier way. I can choose to recognize that this person who's trying to persecute me actually has felt victimized in the past, and they're doing what they're doing from their own internal emotional algebra that they've done to calculate their behaviors. And that's why, in some of the first couple episodes, I talked about the ways in which people calculate their behaviors in different situations. Somebody might play a rescuer at work, but might come home and feel like the victim. They might, with their peers, become the persecutor because they playfully try to mess with other people's power to assure their status in their peer groups. Or they might feel like the caretaker and want to be the big brother or the parent or, whatever in other roles. So we have to see how even these roles can change depending on the dynamics, again, based on our own internal algebra that we do to figure out what role we belong in and where we should be in the different places we play in life. And that's a lot to keep track of. And it can feel really complex and really overwhelming, again, creating more internal disruption.
It is, certainly. And Dr. Reed, it sounds a little counterintuitive, right? I did not think that the victim would have the power. But here we are. It's a fascinating look at how all of this can work, these interpersonal dynamics that are going on, I think a lot of times under the surface to some degree. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. And it's things that if we realize these things in our culture, because you know what, if you don't have a victim, where's the persecutor? And if you don't have a victim, where's the rescuer? It takes the power away from the other roles that can be played. And then guess what? We're working towards equity. We're working towards collaborating to make differences in the world. We're working towards having people, asking people for help or guidance on how to resolve a conflict versus expecting somebody to do something about it, or just expecting to be abused. We're looking for ways that we can build trust, because I think I said it before, if you don't have trust, you often don't have a community. And to me, if you don't have trust, it's hard to really have that idea of family. We just have a bunch of people living around each other. So let's engender and foster trust, collaboration, cooperation, and we'll find this. So last thing to talk about today is entitlement. And to me, entitlement is an issue that's part of the pandemic around the world. It's been throughout history, but this idea that I deserve my fair share is entitlement. And I say it comes from both ends of the spectrum. People who have always had, they feel that they deserve to continue to have. And how dare you think you can take something from me because I deserved it. I work for it. It's mine and it's my fair share. And if you think about the concept of even wealth and or land ownership, we look at who defines the values of a stock, who defines who owns the land, but a human. The value of a stock is determined by a lot of factors. Again, even emotional algebra, irrational exuberance, or we look at the bear market, we look at the bull markets and the differences in the emotions that drive those markets. So emotions are largely and perceptions determine the value of things. The idea of land ownership to me is somebody said, well, okay, you can buy this land and you can own it. It can be taken away from us through a tornado, an earthquake, a flood. We're finding that more and more every day. So we are, again, deriving our power from these other things. And people say, well, I'm entitled to this. I should have it because I've had it before and I've always had it and my family had it. And it goes throughout time. Rather than finding ways to find balance in that. And then again, we have the idea of those who have not, those who feel small. Their entitlement comes from, it's time I got my due. It's my fair share. I deserve that. And then they feel they take it or they expect to be given it. So, we talk about in our government, we talk about entitlements of things that are given to people. And I think there's a lot of discussion in that, probably not for this episode. We can even have a whole, probably look at an episode on some of those issues and talk about some of those issues on how do we help people to find balance in these issues and to see that we're going to get through this by working together, not by working ourselves apart. We're going to understand entitlement as we understand ourselves and then understand others and where we come from in ours. And sometimes where we feel like we might apply entitlement because we feel like we've always had it. And the same person in another situation can say, no, it's time I got my fair share. So I think those are issues to look at as we move forward in these discussions. So a little teaser on the next episode is we're going to talk about conflict escalation and why nobody wins.
Nobody wins because of what you were describing right there. Seems like the ultimate conflict, the entitlements between the haves, the have-nots, a power struggle over who deserves what. No one wins. I can't wait to hear that, Dr. E.
Yeah, and remember, this is not about changing financial models, economic models. It's about understanding human nature and the ways we look at power. It's not about politics. It's seeing the examples of how power plays out through these models and to find different ways to approach life that still these cultures, these concepts that we've created culture can still thrive and survive through collaboration and collective alignment, not through the idea of just having winners and losers.
Absolutely. So I look forward to that in the next episode, Dr. E. Maybe some more pop quizzes happening too.
Absolutely, always. So this week, again, look at the roles that maybe you've been playing and haven't realized it. And again, we'll continue to talk, and I look forward to it. So until next time.
Wisdom of our host, Dr.